And so, welcome everybody. Welcome to an ASI webinar. We try to do these every 6 weeks. Sometimes we drop the ball, but generally it's every 6 weeks. On our last meeting, somebody mentioned about money and spirituality, and that would be a topic. And by sheer coincidence, I was reading a really good book at the time about money and spirituality. And so I contacted the author. And I found it was Mayuri Onnerheim, who we have today, who wrote this book, who is in this unique position of being a diamond approach spiritual teacher and a CPA, a certified public accountant in both Canada and in the US. So she's had to merge both worlds, as we all have to make sense of our spiritual path. So it was just a no-brainer. Let's bring her on and have her inform us, show us about new ways about looking at money within a spiritual context, money within our own lives, and how the topic can be used to help us to grow as individuals and as professionals. So Mayuri, thank you so much for coming to join us.
Yes, you're welcome.
And I'm just going to let Mayuri take it from here, and let's see.
Okay, great. So, one thing you probably have recognized is that there's a lot of resistance to looking at money, that you have personal resistance to looking at money, that even when you contemplated coming on this call, that you weren't totally excited about it, that there was some place in you that was, just not that interested. It's much more exciting to do mindfulness or abundance or something exciting and wonderful than to look at actually your money issues. But the truth is that we spend about 1/3 of our lives dealing with money. So it's a very important part of our life, and most of us kind of segregate our spiritual path from money. We have our spiritual path, and then we do our money as a separate thing. And we don't realize that they are actually together. That we have to bring our consciousness into our money, because it isn't just about realization anymore. It's not about realization. It's about bringing that realization into the world. That is the new spirituality. And if you're going to bring it into the world, then money is embedded in everything we do. It's embedded in our work. It's embedded in our spiritual path. It's embedded in our pleasure. We can't get away from money. It's everywhere. And so if we are not aware of the issues that we bring to money, then we can't bring our consciousness into our money. We will run into those issues. So we may have worked on a lot of stuff. We may have worked on our mother's stuff. We may have worked on all kinds of things. But if you haven't worked on your money issues, you're not going to be able to bring who you are totally into the world. So the way that I talk about that in my book is as a cross, that there is the vertical part of the cross, which is your ascension, which is you working on your realization and having insights and getting more awake and more aware and more open and all those things. And so that's the growth on that. And then on the horizontal one is your life. You're in the world. And you can go all the way you could say all the way from past life into future lives. You could just say this life, what's happening in this life, however you want to conceive of it. It's still this horizontal being a human physical being on the planet and having to deal with life and life's issues. So it's like that for everybody. And money is right in the center of that. It's right in the center. All your money issues are going to play out in you in that center place and its expansion. It's expanding your physical life and who you are in the world to embrace your ascension, That's what we want to do. We are a spark of the Creator. We want to bring all of what we are into the world. And so money issues sit right there. So it's really important to to look at them. So how do you do that? So one of the things that I learned in Diamond Approach is the path of inquiry, which I think a lot of people are understanding and using more now. It was kind of a new thing at the time. But it's like landing in your money issues, your reactions, your resistances that we were talking about, anything that's arising that is an issue for you around money is a place to inquire. But it can seem like this big blank canvas, like there's so many things. How do I even categorize? How do I make sense of this big field of money that I have resistance to, or that is difficult for me? How do I make sense out of this thing? So that was really what I'm attempting to do with my book, is to bring in different aspects of money, a way to categorize different views of looking at money, and how you might inquire into your reactions to each of those views. And in doing that, you have a bunch of different points of view. And one of the things we know about points of view is the more points of view that you know or understand, the more mature you are as a human being. So it's really about growth, maturity, and bringing your realization into the world. So I'm going to read just part of my introduction from my book about this. Bringing increased attention to the development of consciousness in the middle of our money and worldly affairs is the doorway to our freedom for their dominance over us. And that freedom extends out to make a difference in the world. For if we each participate and take responsibility for our part in becoming conscious about the money in our lives, money can be restored to its true purpose, not as a measure of success or intrinsic personal value, or as a way to collect fame and recognition, but as a tool of support for who each human being truly is, and as a reflection of the legacy each of us can leave for the planet. So because we are so identified with a separate entity identity, in other words, being a separate island, trying to function in this world of separate islands, we create other. And as soon as we create other, we create competition. And we create sorry, I'm having a blank moment. We create competition, we create greed, we create success, wanting to be successful, and we measure success and value. We create value for money. We measure value by money. You can hear it in our ads all the time. If you listen to ads on the radio or you see them in a magazine or something, they'll say, valuable people will have this watch. And we get these messages all the time. And it shows up in our politics. We think those who have more value and more wisdom or more something. But it's not true. But we think that value and success and money are who we are. And we don't even know that. We say, no, I know I'm this, I'm on a spiritual path, but then you still are trying to go out and get more money and be more successful. And so you play the game, even if you're not even aware that you're doing it. Or the other possibilities, you can say, well, I'm spiritual, so I don't, I trust. I really totally trust. Well, that's not exactly right either, because that is avoiding having a body and being in the world and having to participate. So it is. So it's a false way of looking at, to me, spirituality. The whole sentence is trust, but tether your camel. So we have to tether our camel, and that means paying attention to how we are dealing with the money in our lives. So I thought I'd go into some of the different places, some of the different points of view that we could look at, not in great detail, because I'm going to go more into that in the course material, but just to give you a taste of some of the different things that you can look at. So one of the first things we have to realize, and we know this probably from all of the spiritual work that we've done so far, which is our early childhood conditioning, is very impactful on our ego structures and the contractions of the ego and what we need to inquire into in order to open them up and get free. But what we don't realize is that one of the main things that got conditioned in us is actually what happens around money. How our parents were with money and how the family was, and maybe even ancestor lineage coming down the bloodline impacts how you are with money. So it's a really great place to start. And there's a whole set of exercises around that are in the exercise that will be sent out if you register for the course. So it will give you a taste of how to do inquiry. And if you haven't really applied yourself to inquiry, and it will also give you a taste of some of the things that you are bringing into your money that you might not even be aware of.
Mayuri, could I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So as you brought that question forward about the family lineage and the conditioning, I had hardworking parents who were very successful. And I felt like all this, that they conditioned me in a really good way,
right,
about money. But then I did something when I was around 14 years old. I started reading all these spiritual books, and I felt, almost like this archetypal energy come forward from past lives of, me being a monk. And so then I forgot about money. I dismissed it, and I played that game that a lot of spiritual people play.
right.
And so, and just one quick funny story, I used to drive past this piece of property on my way to my teacher's house, and it was 20 acres, beautiful in the mountains. And when I was about 20 years old, I sat down with the owner, and he said he would be willing to sell it to me, for say $200,000. And I had this vision of how beautiful it'd be. But I just dismissed it, because I had that strong monk-like conditioning. And then when I went to go look at it later, when I was willing to take responsibility for the money, for my money, the price for it was then $5 million. And so, it showed that shadow that you're speaking about.
Right.
Do you see other people have this one too, that it doesn't just come from family conditioning, but from other
Past
types
life
of conditioning?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying about the cross, that this is our life on the planet. But yes, it's the whole life on the planet. Some people think we have, like 10,000 years worth of those, that we're dealing with. So certainly it's not just family, but my experience about past life is that it's all right here. Right. So if you don't have to remember those. It's great bonus if you do, but you don't have to. Whoever we have been is right here, right now, and whatever's showing up right now is going to be what we need to get free from, because there's a veil for a lot of us to that. But yes, it's helpful.
And the veils are so, they can get real expensive if we're speaking about money.
Yes, they can get very expensive. But you brought up an interesting point, was, this point of view that you have to work really hard for money. That's a point of view. that you got from your parents. You say, well, I thought that was a good value. But that is not necessarily what's needed for the creation of abundance, is to work really hard. So that's a point of view
Yeah,
that we bring,
that's so true. So true.
right? And especially kind of in America, you know, where it was a lot of Protestant Christians who, you know, that was their work ethic. There's a big work ethic. So it was like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you can be successful if you work really hard. And so that is all really in there. So there's going to be cultural conditioning, family issues. So that's part of the thing we were talking about, points of view to start to segregate. And I think there's a blog up there on cultural conditioning that was on your website when I was first going to do this for people to see. So there'll be your family conditioning and cultural conditioning, but it all shows up like in your family, the culture, your family. So it can all show up there. So if you start to pay attention to that, you can wake up to the fact like, wow, it's true. I do have a lot of conditioning. I do have a lot of point of perspectives that I'm holding that I didn't realize I was holding. And when you start to see that, then you can look at your money life and recognize like, oh, that's where I'm playing these out in my money. And I never really saw that before. So then that becomes one segment of things you start to become aware of. And I think I gave an example in the exercise about, you know, in my family, my mother took care of the money. My father earned all the money, but my mother took care of it. She did all the bookkeeping, all the accounting, all the taxes, did everything like that. In my husband's family, his mother did that. So what do you think the chances were in my relationship that my husband was going to do that? I do it. So it can be really, you know, simple things or more complex things, but it gives you a really good grounding to run into, to look at your early childhood, to just open up this idea or this seeing the stream of like, wow, this is really rich, actually. I didn't realize. And those things really impact how we deal with money, how we have dealt with money. And we can start to recognize they're not healthy ways of dealing with money. They're full of beliefs and ideas and lack of freedom about how we might be if we could just be ourselves. So that's one area, is the family conditioning. It's also really important to look at what's happening in the world. And that's getting more and more important. And in my book, I talk about, you know, globalization, which has happened with the internet. And so the whole world has come to be here, right in our living rooms. But what happened is the money went global, but the politics did not go global. So even though corporations are going global, and a lot of them are now have taken, in a certain way, taken over the money system, there wasn't a political process or a voting process where people got to say, this isn't really working for us the way this is going. So there's no matching globalization political process to look at the money system. So that's an issue. Now there's a good thing about it. The good thing about it is that it's reminding us about oneness. You know, the internet's reminding us about oneness. Like we're seeing how destructive war is when we see how it's happening all over the planet. We see, you know, what happens to the environment in Japan and what happens to our oceans. We see all the plastic. We can see, and we can feel the impact. And so we're waking up to oneness and unity of people. but there is no matching process in the money system. It's like it's going to fewer and fewer people, in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And so there is no globalization of money, but to take. And that goes back to what I was talking about, greed. But it can also go back to what some people think is boundlessness. So for some of us, boundlessness means, feeling one with everything, right? Like, you're more spiritual if you feel one with the trees, and you feel one with nature, and you aren't judging people, and you have compassion for them, and your heart is open, and you're just more open to oneness. But for some people, that isn't what that means. Oneness means I get to have as much as I get to have the boundless amount of money. Boundlessness means boundless power. Boundless means boundless amounts of money. And so that's the spiritual misunderstanding that we're needing to address. But in the meantime, a lot of these people have the control over the money system. Now, money is supposed to flow. It's an energy, which we will be talking about. We will be talking about all these subjects. Money's an energy that flows. So we bring energy to money. We bring the energy of our conditioning. We also believe that whatever money comes to us may carry the energy of families. I often, I do private sessions with people around their money issues, and that will be like, this money is tainted. Well, that was the energy they brought it, but that does not have to be the energy that you bring. You bring your consciousness to money, it will transform that money. And you can say, well, I'm not sure I believe about that. So energy and money. But if you look at Emoto, the Japanese author who put hate sounds and love sounds through through water, and then sliced it, and you could see the difference, how beautiful the snowflakes of pure water were, ones that had love things said through them, and how distorted the ones that had hatred going through them. So money is like that. It's like water. It flows through our lives. So it's really important, the energy that we bring it. So another reason to get free, because we want to bring in our highest self into the money. And imagine if everybody in the world was doing that. So that's the other premise, part of what I see is that if we start bringing this into our money, it will affect the planet, because money's in everything that we do. So we'll change our choices. It will change how we vote. It will change how we vote with our money. So I've started taking things back that break to stores, because I'm just so upset about, the planet, that we're using resources from the planet for things that don't last more than a year. They're going all in landfills. So, we're damaging our planet by how we deal with money. And you go into a store, I remember it used to be if you brought in something that was very expensive that didn't work very long, they'd say, oh, I'm so sorry, we'll do something about it. But now it's like we have a policy, 30 days. If it's not 30 days, no refund, you can buy a new one. And I say, I don't want to buy a new one. Why would I want to buy something that doesn't work? I'm just bringing this back because I'm hoping you're going to send it back to the manufacturer and tell them this doesn't work and we're not buying anymore.
Mayuri, can I come in there?
Yes.
I'm feeling a call to action through what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And on a global level, the call to action is where I'm like, oh, I can feel this cranking up inside me.
Right.
where do we start? How I'd like you to kind of, can we talk about marrying those 2 points? Because you've the global, and the first one was our own condition.
Yes.
Where
So, okay, so good question. So in a way, it's about starting to really take responsibility for your money. To really take responsibility. I wanted to say one more thing about the flow globally, and then I will go into that. You know, if things aren't flowing, it's becomes stagnant. So like blood, you'll die. Like water, it becomes stagnant. It's the same with the money system. The world is getting more and more stagnant because the money isn't flowing. And more people are really struggling with not enough because it's not flowing. So that was more like, this is the canvas that we're playing out on. So, but it doesn't exempt us from just taking responsibility for our own money. So, in a sense, it's about right action and integrity. How do we bring right action and integrity and responsibility into our money? So the way that I look at it is, I don't know how many people are aware of that a balance sheet adds up to 0. That's how you know something is in balance, is if you add up to 0, which I think is very mystical, actually, because we are very realized when we are nothing. And a balance sheet is in balance when it adds up to 0. So it's another way of looking at that is, it's God's resources. It's not ours. We get very attached. We think this is my house, my money, my stuff. You know, the minute you die, it's all gone. It's not yours. It's never been yours. It's, you know, it's part of the things that are on the stage for you to play with. And we're trying to become mindful and impeccable and have integrity and be the best that we can be. So if we're not doing it in our money, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. We're not really doing it in our spiritual life if we're not doing it in our money. So we need to become good stewards. So if it's not our resource and we have to facilitate the flow, and we want it to be a good flow, and we want it to be, you know, with positive energy, then we have to be in integrity with our money. We have to be good stewards. And, you know, and in the course we will talk about some of the things that you need to do to be a good steward. But I was going to say that there's 3 that I know that I think are really important that many people on the spiritual path don't do. So the first one is recording your money. So that means doing an income statement or a cash flow statement every month. Every month. It also means doing a budget. And it also means maybe even doing personal financial planning, because we're finding out, and I do say this in my book, but I don't think anybody believed me at the time, that Social Security and Medicare are actually a political whim. And I don't believe that they're going to last if we keep going down this government. And it looks like they may not. And a lot of us have paid a lot of money over the years thinking we were going to have money for retirement. So it's like we need to do personal financial planning, because we got to take responsibility for our own selves. So that means, like, for example, when you do an income statement, you can start to look at what is balance. What am I balanced between needs and wants and savings? I need to have some savings. I need to have some needs. Am I overspending on wants? You can also see where you're spending your money, on what things. You can say, you have a self-image. I am like this. This is my self-image. And then you keep printing out this financial statement every month, And it's got this huge category every month that says clothing, or a huge category that says, you know, haircuts. I mean, or you're buying really expensive car that you don't really need, or, you know, you get the idea. And then the other thing is, if you look and see, like, how many hours of my life does it take to buy something? You know, if I see this handbag and it's the best handbag in the world, and I just have to have it, and then I see the price tag and I realize that's going to take like 5 hours of my life. Do I really want to spend 5 hours of my life to have that thing? So there's a lot of ways that, you know, recording your money can show you things about yourself that you don't see. And it can also show you more about yourself when you make a budget, because if you are in integrity with yourself and you say, okay, I have this view of myself as this kind of person, and I have this budget, and then you realize when you compare your actuals to it that I'm actually not that kind of person. I'm actually acting like this kind of person. So you either have to acknowledge who you are, or change who you believe you are, or your value system, or how you want to act in the world. So it's huge, recording your money. It's a huge source of information for you about who you are, what you're acting like, what you're taking responsibility for. So some of the things, another part that you're talking about is, okay, that's that part. So you do have to have some savings, right? We do have to have them. And that's how we can really make a difference in the world. And I want to say reducing debt is a savings. So if you are reducing your credit card debt, that is a saving. So if you are doing that, I want you to not have a super ego attack about you're not having savings. Because that's one of the things that those with the money did. They just keep giving instruments for people to go in debt. And I'll talk about debt in a bit here.
Mayuri, I'd like just to jump in again
Sure.
with what you were speaking about, that balance sheet and doing a budget.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a spiritual person, all those things, you know, make me cringe. You know, think about doing my taxes and getting everything in QuickBooks and get it all down to zero. You know, and I notice energetically, you know, I tend to just kind of be up here in this real spacious place. And then as soon as we start talking about money, if I just feel from a place of mindfulness, I start to feel, you know, some resistance. But if I stay with it, I start to feel more and more grounded, you know,
Yeah.
more and more part of the planet.
Yes.
And I think it's a beautiful exercise, what you speak about, and especially what you speak about in your book about doing these things. And, you know, also as from a therapeutic perspective, it does exactly what you said. It points out your shadow. It makes you face your self-image and say, okay, this is who I imagine myself to be. And this is, you know, where I spend my, you know, my energy, my flow. This is where my power is going. And I've had some very powerful sessions, both receiving and then also offering, you know, just speaking with individuals about money and just noticing, well, how much money do we spend at Starbucks?
Right.
How much money do we spend on our Land Rover or our home or that couch? And
Right.
it's really a beautiful spiritual practice. And I like to call it that looking at money is a spiritual practice because it helps us be very clear.
It does help you be clear. But you're bringing up a good point. And that is, you know, when you start doing it, it can seem overwhelming. And maybe for some people, you do have to get some help. But, you know, when I started doing accounting, you had a column, 14 columns wide, piece of paper, 14 columns wide, and you wrote down everything and you put in what you paid and then what it got. And then you had to add it up. And then you had to transfer each sheet into a book that summarized it. And so now it's so simple. There's all these programs out there. All you have to do is enter a check, the code it goes to, and at the end of the month you press a button and out comes an income statement. It's like heaven as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and sometimes it'll give you a nice little graph and it'll show you clearly. I like it when it shows a graph and it shows where are you actually, in truth, spending your money.
Exactly. So there can be a real sense of satisfaction, and then once you start doing that regularly, and then it just becomes part of your repertoire, then you can get more creative and you can start to look at, okay, now I have some savings. What do I want to do with that? How do I want to impact the world with that? And then you enter into the whole, investing world, and how do you navigate that? And that's another whole point of view topic. Okay, so now let's look at investing. And so, right now it's investing in a casino. It's about whether the price is going to go up or down. And the trades are happening millions in a second. So it's all about money. It's all about just money. It isn't about what company are you investing in. Is this a good company? Is it, profit, planet, and people, not just profit? So you get to start to vote with where you want to put your money. And maybe that won't make a big difference initially, but if everybody starts doing that and saying, like, I'm not going to invest, I'm not going to buy your products, that's the one I've been doing, but I'm also not going to invest just in the stock market. I'm going to start investing in things that, I think are worthwhile companies that care about the planet and care. And so then it's, bringing the same kind of mindfulness that you would to other things to who you're dealing with. Who is it you're dealing with? What choices are you making? Are you in integrity with your values? What are you doing? So that is another place to take responsibility. But there's a lot of people that don't have money to invest, really. But you can still invest in people. You can invest in people, the people that are around you. There's a lot of college students out there right now who don't have jobs. They've got a huge college debt, but they don't have any work. It's a very difficult situation. So there's a lot of really talented, creative people out there who need some work to do. So maybe if you're getting older, like I am, and I can offer some things to help me with certain things. So like invest in people around you. And maybe you can volunteer into a project that you really like. You don't have money to invest, but there's a project that you have a skill that you could help, that if this project got off the ground, it would be a much better thing for the planet. So there's different ways. So investing isn't just money. You can be very creative about, where am I going to put my time? And is there people I can ask to help me? And so then you bring it more local, because it can seem daunting. Also, I'm still answering your question, Jack. It's taking me a long time. Because we look at this whole global thing and it looks like so despairing. Where do I even begin? What do I do about all these people? But we start here. Start with right around you and what you care about and what you're able to do. So think globally, act locally, I think is very, very valuable. And it doesn't mean that acting locally doesn't mean that you're not going to donate time or money to an organization that does work globally, but you're making that choice from being with you right here, right now, looking at your situation, what resources, what money you have, what can I do, and then doing something.
Because you're really speaking about compassionate action. The topic's money, but it's compassionate action.
Yeah.
The flow of resources into the world, supporting the heart and supporting compassion.
Right.
And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I thought you were going to teach us how to invest, but in a sense, you're asking us to invest in compassion and that which is in alignment with our hearts.
Yeah. And no, but I'm saying all three. You can still put profit motive in there. Because the company that is doing compassion action that is able to, sustain itself is going to have more impact on the planet. So it's a mixture.
Yeah. Yeah, where I think was the old model, say the religious model was you just invested in the church and, maybe you got, the teachings back, but it didn't actually help grow what you're calling the 3 Ps, just help the church and maybe you,
Right.
to some degree.
Right. And, that's one of the things, what is the truth about the church? What is really the truth about the church? Is it espousing the values of consciousness, or has it become a control mechanism, a greed mechanism? So, I do talk about some of that also in my book. So the other thing about, so in a certain way also that I think the global thing we're talking about is spirit and matter, right? So spirit and matter have been separated. And the value of a woman who gives birth to matter through her womb has been undervalued, we could say, for thousands of years. And the patriarchy has been the ascended male or unascended male has been running things. And it's not blaming, or masculine, it's not blaming men, because everybody suffered from this. It's just been the lack of value of the feminine. And I think that's changing. But the value, what that did with the masculine being in charge is that it became science, more about science and reason and materiality, and less about collaboration and heart and consciousness. So they've become out of balance. And an out of balance masculine ends up being tyranny. So that's what we have a lot of. So we have to bring also ourselves back. So how do we deal with the patriarchy? It's happening. It's starting to happen. I mean, I always thought, I don't know, somebody might have a different opinion, but I always thought the 50s when I was born, that my mother was like, her generation was in a sense the worst. They were supposed to be like just housewives and put on little dresses and aprons and serve their husband. It's like, oh my God, and so that was like the pinnacle of the furthest away we could get from balance. And now it's starting to move back. And we see all these issues showing up, like in Me Too and in different ways. So we can see that. We can see, I think the way that the money system has operated has been a reflection of the patriarchy, actually, because it doesn't include collaboration or consciousness or caring or compassionate action, which would be, if there are feminine values in there, it would be part of it, and it's not. So it's been separated, and that's part of the problem in the world. So what do we do? Well, we can add our voice. I'm glad there's a voice now, that it's happening in Me Too. But really what we need to do is bring that to balance in ourselves. Really always comes back to us. So
can I add something there, Myra?
yeah,
For me, it for me, one of my understandings of money is that it was never created as part of the planet or part of nature. It was made by people in order to make the barter system more efficient, I guess.
yeah,
And for something that was created by people, it's already at a distance from our natural human characteristics and human qualities.
yeah.
And I feel a pull to humanize it, to give it that energy in some way.
Okay, so yeah, yes. So one of the things that I see that happened to money that dehumanized it is that it became a person. It became a person that, because money was meant, like you said, for exchange, for the value of exchange and our connection. Okay, so to extend our connection, because if I don't want your sheep and I've got wool and I've got something else, at least money, we can trade in a circle. So it extended things. So that was lovely, connection. But what happened is money took on its own things, that it needs profit. Who says money needs profit? It needs interest. Who says money needs interest? It needs to be made in certain geographical areas. Okay, so let's move a factory from California to Mexico. So all these people in California are out of work. That's not what money was meant to do. Make decisions based on the needs of money. It's supposed to be, money was serving people. So by making money a person, just like they made corporations a person for voting, they've made money a person. That takes away humanity, takes it out of being human. And that's a big problem that needs to be addressed. And I don't know how.
I think it's up to the spiritual. No, there's an opportunity for the spiritual community to be the elders, to be informants of where spirituality is going. Because as we know, structures are changing. Why is the ASI here? Structures are changing. How it was is not good enough. It's not responding to where we feel our culture is going. And so the same with money. And I think there is huge potency if the spiritual community, if we were to really embrace it and move from the vow of poverty and the abstinence away from something that's human-made and of the world and has been co-opted to be a person and to be a thing in itself rather than for service for our community. If we can pull back from that, I do feel that there's an opportunity here for the spiritual community to redefine it, because we've never really had a positive relationship with it as far as I can see. It's always clouded in some vows or poverty is better than abundance, just quacky stuff. And I think the opportunity is here. It's here, and that's why I'm excited about this. It's like, surely there's something in how we approach, be it the self-inquiry method that you're bringing to us, be it in terms of the compassionate value system that Craig spoke about. Surely we can bring that other energy to money to redefine how it is and how it works,
Well, I think you will. And that's the point of me, in a certain way, doing this book and doing the inquiry, is that when you start to realize how you were being run by all this conditioning, all the different aspects I'm talking about, that you will start to make choices out of a more conscious place, and that will have an impact on the collective. So, and I think we do need to do it locally. Like, look at how are you going to do that right here, right now, you as this person. So definitely. But it made me, what you were asking made me think about something else I just wanted to mention. So scarcity mentality. That is such a huge one. And that's one of the things that we'll definitely look at in the course, which is how to get away from the scarcity mentality, which is difficult because egos themselves are deficient. So they're at the bottom of every ego is deficiency. So you're always going to be running into some place in you until you realize that is feeling like it's got a hole in it or a deficient place. And so there is this thing, perspective in the diamond approach that, when we turned away from being towards ego, exactly those moments in our childhood when we were getting conditioned, when we did that, and it's usually to satisfy, functioning in the world, functioning for our parents because they were conditioning, functioning in the world how it was. So we feel like, well, that doesn't work. My being doesn't work. So I have to go over here. We leave a little hole there. So there's this thing called the theory of holes, that if you can inquire into this, where you feel deficient, where you feel like you're not enough, where you feel like you're scarce, where you feel like, and there's very specific holes. I bring up several examples of things that could happen in your childhood where you could have created one of these holes. And then when you feel that, when you recognize that, then you can move into the opposite side of being. Like you realize, wow, I really, really have not valued myself. And now I'm recognizing, hey, I'm an amazing spiritual being with lots of capacities, and I just haven't recognized these things. And now I have a fire under me, and I'm going to go do it. And I'm great. And then all of a sudden you're not sitting in that deficiency. And it comes from inquiring into and meeting. So to me, it's all about seeing all these different aspects. And I think once you see them, you can change yourself. You can choose to be different, how you are.
Mayuri, I'd like to ask for a little clarification on that. And so it's something that I've noticed just with folks that I've worked with, and I want to know if you've noticed the same, is say with the theory of holes, and when you're working with an individual, say, who has a big hole and then has, corresponding unworthiness issues.
Right.
And then oftentimes do you also see corresponding them not sharing their gift and not sharing their truth, and then corresponding, say, credit card debt or lack of money or funding?
Absolutely. Because then they get caught in the whole debt model, which we haven't covered. I'm kind of debating, should we talk about debt? I think I'll talk about debt for a few minutes. Yes, absolutely. Because the only real value is in being. When we're really conditioned, we think the value comes from the money, from success, from all those things. So we get caught in the world entirely, and we're not valuing ourselves. We don't recognize the value of ourselves. And so we don't even a lot of people may not even know what their gifts are. They're so, thinking, well, I have my spiritual practice. I go once a week or once a month, and I do my weekend, and I have a really great time, but my life is hell. My job is hell, and I'm just trying to survive, and I don't even know if I can keep going to my spiritual weekend because money's getting tighter. And so that is the scarcity. That's what when you're living in scarcity, that's what it feels like. And that can change. You can change to a feeling of abundance. It's really about changing your consciousness, not about changing your bank balance.
But oftentimes those correspond, when, the more you love yourself, the more you work with your whole, and you discover your enoughness, like you speak about in the book.
Yes.
Oftentimes there tends to be just a correlation.
Oh, there is.
Not getting out of, getting out of debt or whatever it is, and making more, a healthy living wage.
Oh, absolutely. No, I meant that actually. Yeah, the value isn't the bank balance, but when you value yourself, you might actually experience more abundance.
Yes.
Many people do.
Yeah.
Because they're no longer in a belief of lack and limitation.
Yeah.
So it's really the belief that is the issue. And the whole money system supports that belief. So I just want to take 1 minute to talk about debt, and then I want to open up for people to ask questions. So every time the country prints money, they also incur an equal amount of debt. That's what the Federal Reserve is. The Federal Reserve is not a government agency. It is run by a bunch of wealthy people that are creating a lot of debt in the world. So the money system right now, debt was not originally part of the money system. It's been co-opted. It wasn't even allowed. Early in the church times, they would not allow charging interest. They'd say that was usury. That if somebody needs to borrow, then they're in difficulty. So why would you want to try and get more out of them? But the money system co-opted debt, and the culmination was the Federal Reserve. And so now what happens is every time there's money created, there's an equal amount of debt created. And what happens is when a few people are taking the income, what do you think happens to the debt? Everybody else gets burdened with the debt. So what happened is, this has been going on for centuries, but it's gotten wilder and wilder. Used to be, there'd be like, the milkman and then the corporate CEO. If you were to look on a curve, I guess I should go like that. It'd be like that, right? On an XY axis. But now it isn't like that. It's like 90% of the people are along the bottom, and then there's just a few that it's like higher, 2 stories high. So it's totally out of balance, and people are being left with the debt, and they're struggling. So it's very important to understand. You don't want a debt. And if you can recognize that really you have enough and not debt, until you can get free enough to have more abundance, like you were talking about, to really make a difference, at least don't debt. So what they did was, see, with these corporations, they took, they were making a lot more money. Did they give it in raises to all their employees? No. They gave them credit cards. They invented credit cards so they could borrow to get all these things that they needed. So we need to wake up to what's happening. Really, truly wake up. So it's not just spiritual, it's like really waking up to what's happening in the world. I don't know if anybody's listening to, I shouldn't bring politics in, actually. I won't. Okay.
High risk, Mayuri, if you
Yes, I'm not going to bring politics in. So, but that is true about the money system. So, that's just one example. Right. So, so do you guys have anything that's kind of hanging out there that you want to ask me before I just open it up for people who want to ask questions?
Let's open it up because we've just got 25 minutes left. So okay. If that's all right with you.
Yep, that's fine.
So Suzanne is just going to do an overall unmute, and then everybody has the option to unmute themselves and speak as they wish, and we're just going to do free for all. Whoever feels they're drawn to speak, we'll figure it out. Just let it roll.
Oh, that reminds me. Don't be shy, because, in my experience in doing money courses over the years, people would rather talk about their sex life than their bank balance. But anything that you want to share is, relevant to other people. So don't feel like you're alone. I think we often feel like we're alone and we're deficient. We don't know how to deal with money and everybody else does. It's not true. So it can be helpful for people if you bring your own stuff forward.
I'd like to say hello, and I kind of feel like I'm on a totally different planet here. and I'll explain what I mean by that. But first, you know, your comment a minute ago was, and tell me how to pronounce your name again.
Mayuri.
Mayuri?
Mayuri. Yeah, M-A-Y.
Mayuri.
Mayuri.
Okay, thank you. One of the ways that I've participated in the global participation is using my own individual situation to find out what happens during foreclosure, what happens when I actually sign the papers for a loan, a home loan. And I discovered that I am the creditor, that we are not debtors. But globally, we're called debtors. So I just wanted to throw that out. And, you know, if anybody wants to research or explore that more, it's readily available. And if you want to email me, I can give you some links and things like that. The other thing is you had mentioned that money has become a person. And in my experience and in my research, it seems like that there's a handful of people that have assigned power to money and use that, as you mentioned, to control us.
Right.
So I just wanted to throw that out, that, you know, money in and of itself doesn't have any power other than what we give it, as it,
Right.
That's true for anything.
Right.
Right before we started this, I sat down and asked inside. I just got quiet for a minute and kind of went inside and asked, you know, is there anything here for me? Which is what I do to get to do the inquiry that you're talking about. And I heard, you no longer owe anything. Just that little voice in my head that gives me some wisdom, you know.
Yeah.
And it said, you no longer owe anything. And when I heard that, it was kind of like, wow, I got it. I really got a sense of what it feels like to owe and how that clouds everything.
Right. Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you or any of you have anything you want to add to that. Because for me, I'm a writer, and I sat down and started writing about this sense of owing. And I just wanted to throw it out and see what any of you might have to add to that.
Yes. I love that. That's like, you know, another form of scarcity mentality, you know, another lens to look at scarcity through. Like, you see yourself as an ower. I owe. And that's what they want. That's how power happens, right? You are a victim. You are at the behest of, I'm an ower. And freedom is, no, I'm not an ower.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am me, and I get to express myself. And now this is how I'm going to express myself through my money.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example of a bid for freedom.
Cool. Yeah. There was one other thing too that I wanted to throw out, and that is when you spoke of the three things, doing a budget, a monthly statement, and I forgot the third one. But you know,
plan for your life.
Yeah. When I oh, that one. That's funny. When I approach those kinds of things, I feel off balance. Yes. I don't relate to them in a way that supports me being calm, you know? So my entire life has been not that, but yet I'm always provided with everything that I need, including money. When I, you know, whatever I need, it comes. So you know, I get a little, there's a little confusion that comes in when I hear you talk about, you know, those three things that I don't do. And if I do go to do them, it throws me off center. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like something that supports me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm open to any comments from anybody about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a comment about that. So, you know, if you're in the flow, remember I said money flows? So what I didn't say is you can have a trickling stream or you can have a rushing river, but if it's flowing, right? You know,
okay.
it's flowing. But for a lot of people, it's not flowing, and they're having a lot of difficulty, and so they haven't taken responsibility. They haven't looked at their issues. So you know, you may have done work. Who knows around what?
Oh yeah,
around flowing. But I still personally, you know, from my putting my accountant hat on, I don't think it's a bad idea to know where you are. At least have a balance sheet and what your plan is, because who knows what's going to happen in the future as we get older. So I do think it is trust, but tether your camel. So maybe you don't have to tether it at the same level of detail as some other people would be beneficial for them to do. But I still think it's a good idea to have a look. And when you get uncomfortable, that's good news. Uncomfortable means there's something left in you that still needs to be transformed or looked at.
Well, there's a difference for me between resistance and intuitively, there's an intuitive discomfort that's different than resistance.
Of course. So you have to.
Okay, and that's what I'm talking. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay. But still, I can't take off that other hat.
Well, it's okay with me if you leave it on. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.
I'm going to jump in there. I know Connie has her hand up. It's in connection with Georgette's comment there. I found when I started to record every being and it's like, all right, okay, I'm moving from a socialist country to a capitalist country. I'm going to have to get to grips with what this energy is about. So I consciously started to do that. And what I found is that I learned an awful lot about that contraction, which I too had interpreted as, I've never functioned like this. I've always had enough. Why should I get down and dirty with my accounts? In doing so, though, I found that, wow, there's a whole, I don't know if it was the global understanding of money or it was a little bit of that, and it was the energetic global understanding of money and a little bit of, you know, messages that I got as a child, you know, and more probably from spirituality than as a child, actually, when it comes to money. And it was moving that energy. Yeah. That's what I was picking up as, this is intuitively wrong, but, you know, or not my way. There's too much of a contraction here. This isn't my way. I still went through it because I knew this is surely more embodiment. If I'm living in a capitalist place, I need to learn how the economy works here. Yeah. So my mind was approaching it by common sense, but I found that I was going through other layers.
Yes.
Other layers of the global, of the dehumanization, of the personification, of greed. I was going into those layers with a different energy.
Yeah.
So from my own experience, even if it feels like don't do it, I think we're called to do it.
I think so. Yeah.
Change is coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, mine, because that's what the book is. No, I do believe that. Excuse me, 1 second. Sorry. Okay, somebody else had a question?
Yeah, I'll leap in here. This ties into a number of things that I've been talking about in the group for a while. I've been trying to get a conversation going about what do we do about the world? And that seems like a difficult conversation to get going in this kind of group. And I think part of it has to do with money. Because as you point out, anything that you do in this world, which is hugely dominated by capital, without money, there's not a whole lot you can do. And so I think people stay within the lane of teaching, working one-on-one, which is primary, great. But we're seeing a world in chaos right now.
Yeah.
And we do have a place in this world, as illusionary, upside down, and backwards as it is. We're still citizens here. We have a responsibility to act responsibly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I keep asking, what can we as spiritual people, you know, I don't want to put a big deal on that. What can we bring into this situation? And it usually comes down to, well, we can teach classes and maybe write a book and, you know, that kind of thing. But that doesn't really move the kind of financial structures, governmental structures, social structures that you're talking about. And so I know for myself, from maybe a decade into my own spiritual, whatever you want to call it, journey, in the 70s, by the end of the 70s, I realized I wasn't fit for work in this world. The structures just didn't make sense to me. So I began to do projects that I developed that came out of my own internal process and fitting those into the culture. Well, then you have to finance them. You have to find ways to support them. And particularly if they're of an unusual nature, that's quite difficult. It's not like, you know, just going to an investment banker and saying, how about raising some money for me? So over the past couple of decades, I've been involved in the investment world because of that. In the 90s, I raised almost $1 million for the last project. This one, I only had, you know, the money that I had left over. So pumped all of that into this particular project. Now, I'm getting to where you actually were talking. And you raised the whole issue of the fact that money and investment is hugely focused on profit. And that's been the case for a long time in this country, in the West in general.
Yeah.
But there is a movement, as you apparently are aware, probably began in the early 80s with people like Josh Mailman and the Threshold Foundation and the Social Venture Circle of so-called socially conscious investment that has now trickled down into what's called the triple bottom line, which you referred to. So here's this aspect of the investment world, people who are, and apparently, at least in the early days, began from a spiritual focus. At least that's what I get from doing my research on these people, that wanted to say, instead of just doing business in any way that we can and making money, they all came from wealthy families, and then putting our money into the church or putting our money in, you know, doing philanthropic donations, that we would invest in companies and nonprofits and other activities that were doing something positive in the world. So in some way, they were channeling their spiritual intuition into a very business structure. And now it's, shoot, when the Rockefeller Foundation started the whole socially conscious investment world, and was it Jamie Dimon recently came out with a bunch of business leaders and said, we've got to start talking about a triple bottom line rather than just profit. There is a movement in the capital world in this direction, and it seemed to have had a spiritual beginning. I think Ram Dass was involved in the beginning of it.
It was. The problem is like what I was saying before, is that, you know, those in control, they have a really great way of seeing, like, oh, here's a bid for freedom. How can we undermine it?
And I have seen that. That's what I'm saying. I started from where it began, the Threshold Foundation, to the present day, where it's been kind of co-opted.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at, and this is going back to the conversations I've been trying to get started in the group itself, and that is the spiritual community. And again, I use that as a loose framework. seems to be separated from any significant financial power in which it could do the kind of things that that socially conscious group tried to do. But they're two separate groups. They don't seem to have any real connection, which I find, researching it this year, I found this fascinating, that there's a whole field of the business community that literally wanted to see how they could bring their spiritual insight into business. And here's the whole spiritual community that wants to somehow bring its spiritual awareness into the world. And those two communities don't seem to be in connection. I've been trying to connect with a number of these people, and you're going through gatekeepers just like you do with any investment community. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of interwork between them, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, I understand that whole thing. That's part of the reason I wrote this book. I wanted to bring some awareness of some concrete things that are going on in the money world to spiritual people, so that they could so that they could move closer, have a movement closer in consciousness to that, so they understand that.
Well, do you have any?
Hopefully, no, I don't have an answer.
No, I mean, do you have any? Have you seen any insight in your research as to why there's kind of this disconnect between the triple bottom line investment world and the more focused spiritual community? Why there's not a crossover? It seems like it would be a natural.
It does, but I think it is happening more from what I see in the younger generation. I don't think all is lost. I see it is happening. I think it is happening more, that we have moved more into taking responsibility about what's happening in the world, and they are opening up, maybe that their focus is too limited to what's happening in the world and doesn't have as much of a spiritual focus. So I think this is a process. You know, we're born the same time probably, and you know, I always thought that the 60s was going to change the world. But I see that it has, just not at the pace that my ego would like. I would like to have died when this had already happened, and I realized I have to be more patient than that.
And I'm all over patience, no question. You've got to take one step at a time, but clearly we are facing some things that are not going to allow us to drag. We have to be patient, but things are coming to a head very quickly right now.
They are, and I think that, you know, in some ways, you know, I even, well, no, I don't want to say that. I just think that things are going to come to a head, and you're going to see the movement that keeps up to it coming to a head.
Is there a hesitance in the spiritual community to doing anything that requires money?
I do. That's why I wrote the book. I think people have to wake up to what's going on in the money world, so that they are conscious about money and can be players rather than just trying to stay on the. So, you know, remember I did the cross?
Yep.
Get off of just the spiritual people, please get off of just the going up and down transcendent thing and realization, and realize you are a human being on planet Earth. There's a reason you have a body, you're physical, you got to join the game.
Yes.
Okay, so let's bring some consciousness to what keeps you from doing that, so that you can be more free to join the game and be a voice to support those to move towards you. Move towards the middle also. People who are more on this, that if you move off of this into this, the people who are more on here will hear more of this.
And right now, that's not what I hear. That's not what I'm seeing. I know it's happening. I do know it's happening because I've been doing a ton of research in this field, but there still seems to be this disconnect from the focused spiritual community and the socially conscious
So
business
I hear
community.
you.
I don't know why.
I don't have an answer to that question.
Good enough. Good enough.
I just see that there's a movement that needs to happen, and I'm supporting that.
Yeah,
I'm
and
with you.
your
I'm with
book is an excellent, it's groundbreaking work, moving energy in that direction, connecting those two.
Right.
And so, David, check her book out, and I think all of us, if you haven't gotten it already, check it out. I think Connie's been waiting patiently for a long time. So,
Okay.
Connie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm wondering what this zero balance item is that you mentioned. To me, that almost sounds like no savings. Expenses equals income.
No, how it works is the assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. So if you have a house, say for example, that's worth $500,000, and you have a mortgage of $300,000, and the equity is $200,000, right? Okay. So assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. So this is math. Do you have that? If you move the equity and the liabilities to the other side, you have zero on one side, you will see assets minus equity and debt equals zero. So that's how accounting programs work. That's how they've always worked. How you know something is in balance is that it adds up to zero. It's just a math equation. But I find it mystical that, and I'm not the only person, there's a lot of people say the mystery of numbers. And the guy who invented bookkeeping was a monk. So it's kind of like, it's all an illusion. It's just all here to teach us. So we do need to take responsibility for it and learn from it, but it isn't really a thing that we can take with us. So that's what I'm saying with that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mayuri, would you give us an idea of what the course is going to cover? It's going to start 4 sessions long in November and December, and there's a blog post on our website with the details with registration is open that I'll post in the chat in a moment. But I'm, from what you spoke about today, how will we go into that in the course?
Well, I'm going to be picking, for more than one topic. I'm just going to be dividing up some of the things that I covered a little bit today to go into more detail in and talk about personal issues that can come up for people. And then to do inquiries into those personal issues so that you can see for yourself. Because, you can listen to me and say, oh, well, that sounds great, or I don't agree with that, or whatever. But if you, inquire into your own experience of something, that's what will bring it alive. So it's to bring more detail in some of the topics I covered and to have you do an exercise. And then at the end of the exercise, so we'll do breakouts, and people will go out into a breakout and do an exercise with somebody on the course. And then we will come back and we will do comments and questions. And that's when people will share or ask questions, because it's not from an intellectual place, it's from their own experience. And so it starts to impact, because from my understanding and experience of alchemy, if it's just understanding that's happening in the head, it's not going to transform you. You need to have the experience of the emotions. You need to have the experience of what it feels like in the body. And the inquiry exercises are designed to have all three happen so that you get impacted and can have a direct experience for yourself what I'm talking about.
And so,
and that's really where the rubber meets the road is in the inquiry practices, and where it gets grounded and practical in your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, in response to David, that, in spirituality, there's such a shadow around money. And, that's what a big part of Mayuri's work has been is to expose that shadow and then to liberate the energy so that the money can flow again in a practical way.
And I only exposed about half of the shadow I wanted to, at the time. I think it would be more acceptable now, because people are more and more seeing, what I've known to be true for a long time, and more people are seeing it. So I'm glad about that.
You were ahead of your time, Mayuri, but I hope we're ready now. We're certainly recognizing that we need to make a shift.
Yeah.
So we're at the time, folks. Registration is open until November 5. It starts November 6. As usual, it's a Wednesday afternoon, same time, or Wednesday morning if you're in Australia, or Thursday morning, wherever they are. And it's 2 Wednesdays, and then Thanksgiving and silly season is in there, and then it's another 2 Wednesdays. So it's 4 weeks. It's $99. Sign up, send people links, whoever would find value in diving much deeper. It's just an offering that we hope can make some shift in our culture.
And please come, because the deeper the field, the more the transformation. I mean, the bigger the field, the more transformation that will happen. Will be more impactful.
Yeah, it's a call to action on many levels.
Yeah,
I really feel it is a call to action on much more. It's like, I suppose one of the things that I've noticed in the spiritual community is there's this nasty attitude that we're beyond money. We're beyond that.
Right.
And it stinks. So let's get down and dirty. Let's do the work. Let's embrace it. And if we don't dive in and clear our own crap, we there's nothing we can do then, we're just going to be navel gazing. Yeah. So call to action, folks. That's my call to action. Mayuri, thank you so much. Thank you so much for today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And much love to you all, and see you in November 6th when Mayuri, that's the next time we gather as a group, the first session of Mayuri. And when you sign up, an exercise comes free, just to say thank you for signing up. An exercise that's in addition to all the course material will be sent, which was prepared by Mayuri. So the link is in the chat box as well. Hope to see you then, and thank you, Mayuri. Thank you so much for your input.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.